Welcome back to Mental Health Through Will Training by Abraham A. Lowe. This is Section 2, Chapter 13, The Unconvincing Complaint. The panel discussed the subject of helplessness is not hopelessness, taken from the October 1946 issue of the Recovery Journal. Carolyn mentioned a recent experience in a department store. Approaching the elevator, she was preoccupied with her inner difficulties, and instead of pressing the elevator button, she pulled a light switch. The store section went dark. I immediately realized my mistake, felt tense, and trembled. But then I applied the spotting technique and knew that average people make mistakes of this kind. And if I didn't have the courage to make mistakes in trivial matters, I did not consider myself a person of average person of average, but one of exceptional inefficiency. After the spotting, I was calm. In former days, I would have become hysterical, would have thought that surely something was wrong with my mind. I would have suffered awful sensations and would have rushed to the phone telling my husband that was proof again. That was again proof I couldn't get well and trying to convince him that I was hopeless. Carolyn described in graphic detail the striking contrast between her present and her past behavior. In the past, prior to receiving her recovery training, she felt helpless and hopeless when a minor mishap occurred. Now she feels helpless for a moment. The idea of hopelessness presents itself in a flash, but she spots it instantly and commands her muscles not to respond to her silly feelings. This is all in accord with the basic principles of recovery's self-help system and requires little comment. But now it ought to be commonplace that our patients are trained in recovery to deny muscular expression to their feelings of fear and anger, and to control their temper through the process of spotting. There was one phrase in Carolyn's account that arrested my attention. In the past, she said, she would have rushed to the phone trying to convince her husband that she was hopeless. A statement of that sort has a weird and uncanny note. It seems to me that were I faced with a hopeless situation, I might either resign myself to my fate, or I might make a desperate effort to force the issue, or I might pray for deliverance, or I might yell for help. But the last thought that could conceivably enter my mind would be to want to convince somebody that really and truly I am actually helpless and hopeless. Yet Caroline, in a condition of seeming despondency, had no other thought but to be convincing. If Carolyn's ambition was to convince her husband, she must have assumed that he needed convincing, that he doubted her stories of suffering and agony, and at the very least that he thought them exaggerated or colored or twisted. Her stories were what we call complaints. And if Carolyn's case was somehow representative of nervous patients in general, we must consider that the leading fear in the minds of our patients is that their complaints are doubted, that their sincerity is questioned. In short, that they are not convincing. No wonder they make heroic efforts to compel conviction. What the patient wants his listener to be convinced of is that he is a helpless victim of his symptoms, that he tries everything within his power to be calm, but it does not succeed, that he is trapped by his handicap and cannot escape its grip. His tantrums, his bursts of dizziness, his weakness and fatigue, his tremors and palpitation, he thinks are all of one cast. They are beyond endurance and beyond control. These complaints lack conviction because they are grossly contradicted by the facts of daily observation. The tantrums have peculiar quality of being enacted at home only, perhaps only in the physician's office, but never at a concert or a social gathering. The fatigue, unendurable in the forenoon, disappears miraculously in the late afternoon and in the evening. The headache, splitting or killing, follows immediately upon a domestic squabble, and vanishes conveniently when a welcome guest arrives on the scene. Several of my patients were unable to stop a jerk in their arm whenever they were at home, but kept it under perfect control when they went shopping in the morning or visiting in the evening. Some had vomiting spells in restaurants, but never at home, or vice versa. I have seen patients whose throats locked exactly at 1 p.m. every day. I have seen others who scratched away furiously at an uncontrollable itch at home, but controlled it perfectly in the presence of friends and strangers. There's the patient who experiences his unbearable fatigue on Sundays and holidays only. On weekends, on weekdays, and in the office or factory, he is alert and chipper. Or the girl who vomits in the morning only to have only only at home only, never at 9 a.m., and never outside the home. Or the woman who is nauseated in the afternoon only after her husband returns from work. On Sundays, the nausea persists all day, the husband being home all day. Most suspect the insincerity, and most damaging to the patient's reputation is his incurable fondness for monstrously exaggerated and the intenseness of his symptoms. If month after month and year after year he clamors that he simply can't stand it, that if something isn't done immediately he is surely going to end it all, that he can't take it any longer, and that today he is positively at the end of his rope. If these hackneyed phrases are repeated monotonously, spell after spell, and tantrum after tantrum, the relatives cannot fail to realize how well the patient can stand it, how little he is inclined to end it all, and how the rope has a mysterious way of lengthening without reaching its end. The threats are then ignored and the alarms treated with contemptuous indifference. There is no point multiplying these examples, although it would be easy for me to cull additional hundreds or thousands from my records. They all tell the same story. The nervous patient is not convincing, and the nervous patient wants to be believed. He must make it his supreme goal to compel conviction. That's what Carolyn did. In a panic which seemed to shake her with elemental force, she did not cry for help, but thought of one thing only: to convince her husband that her plight was beyond remedy. That's the patient's complaint sound that that the patient's complaint sounds unconvincing to the relatives is a calamity. But that calamity turns into outright tragedy if the patient is unable to convince himself. The conviction is denied him irrevocably. The complaint may be a frequency of urination which forces him to run to the bathroom every 5 minutes. That surely is something I cannot stop, he exclaims or thinks. Then he sits through a show or a card game for a solid 3 or 4 hours without even passing out of the otherwise uncontrollable bladder trouble. How can he possibly believe his own doctrine of helplessness if a mere card game helps him check his trouble? Another complaint may be that of unbearable pressure in the head. Clearly, that is out of my control, the patient insists. When questioned, he admits that the pressure is absent when he's at the office. But once I step out of it, I have it. Or take the case of the mother who yells at her own children incessantly because they are intolerably noisy. With the neighbor's children, she is a paragon of charm and sweetness, in spite of their equally intolerably loud and boisterous behavior. That mother cannot by any twist of logic make herself believe that her temper is out of control. The ease with which she controls it with the neighbor's children stamps out her complaint as insincere and renders it unconvincing. Experiences of this kind admit of one conclusion only: the patient has good control, but fails to practice it under certain conditions. Fully aware of his ability to help himself, he is unable to believe his own protestations of helplessness, and trying to convince his relatives his efforts are stymied by their own lack of conviction. If a person is unable to believe himself, he loses or weakens his self-respect. If he is unable to make others believe him, he loses or weakens their respect for him. And that is, he ruins or impairs his reputation. It is difficult to live without proper self-respect, but life becomes an almost unbearable affliction if both self-respect and reputation are wanting or markedly defective. From this vantage point, it is easy to understand the tragic plight of the long nervous patient. After years of futile and ludicrous complaining, his self-respect is in tatters and his reputation torn to shreds. He could restore both should he decide resolutely to give up his plaints and lamentations. If he fails to do that, he is doomed to lead a life of indignity and self-contempt, a life of stigmatization and social isolation. An existence of this kind is possible only if somehow, by hook or by crook, the illusion of uncontrollability is maintained and fortified against all evidence to the contrary. The doctrine of helplessness and hopelessness must then be hammered unceasingly and unrelentingly into the patient's own head to save his reputation. Hence the imperative urge to carry on a veritable crusade of convincing, that is, complaining. The proudest achievement which recovery can claim is the thoroughness with which it has purged its members of their pernicious habit of wailing and lamenting. Trained in the techniques of spotting and commanding their muscles, our patients have ceased complaining and are now convincing. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Let's see what we got next. Chapter 14 is partial views and total viewpoints. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you again soon.